Welcome to Trading Lessons from Legends, a place where stories are not told to impress but to awaken. Here, we walk through the lives of those who faced the market at its most merciless moments. Men who rose, fell, and rose again, not because they mastered numbers, but because they learned to master themselves. Every episode you hear here is more than a history. It is a mirror, reflecting what happens when human emotion meets the law of reality. If you are here, you are part of a rare group, people who believe that wisdom outlasts wealth, and that the deepest profit comes from understanding. Before we begin, we want to thank you truly for taking the time to listen, to reflect, and to grow with us. May these stories remind you that even in ruin, there is rhythm. Even in loss, there is learning. And even in silence, there is truth. Now, sit back, breathe slowly, and let us begin. The silence after the storm. The tickers had gone silent. The floor that once trembled beneath the weight of shouting men now felt like an empty cathedral after a long-forgotten sermon. Even the air had changed, no longer filled with the smell of ink and sweat and greed, but with the faint dust of absence. Jesse Livermore sat alone at the same desk that had once been an altar of fortune. He used to listen to the sound of paper and profit the way sailors listen to waves. Every whisper of a stock was a promise. Every rise a heartbeat. Now, nothing moved. Only the clock, patient and cruel, marking the seconds of a man who had finally stopped moving. There are defeats that crash like thunder, and there are defeats that arrive like dawn, slow and undeniable. His was the latter. No dramatic collapse, no final gamble shouted across the pit. Just a slow erosion, confidence dissolving, clarity fading, until the numbers on the board no longer made sense, and neither did he. He had lived so long in motion that stillness felt like death. But the market had taken everything it could. The money, the noise, the belief that control was possible. All that remained was silence. And in silence, there are no lies. For the first time in decades, Jesse heard the world without ambition. He heard the wind through the window. He heard his own breath. He even heard the faint hum of the city outside life continuing, indifferent to his collapse. And beneath all that, a quieter sound still, the echo of a mind confronting itself. He realized then that ruin is not an event. It is a mirror. It shows you everything success kept hidden: your vanity, your fear, your loneliness disguised as drive. When the crowd vanished, when applause faded, when the numbers no longer obeyed him, he met a stranger he had carried his whole life, himself. He thought of the years spent chasing patterns, as if certainty were a woman he could finally possess. He thought of the late nights, the ticking telegraph, the endless notebooks filled with numbers that promised meaning. He remembered the feeling of being admired, men watching him as if he had found the secret chord that made money sing. But he also remembered the exhaustion, the way victory demanded another and another, until success itself became a prison built of expectation. Now, in the quiet aftermath, he saw that the most dangerous addiction was not profit, it was purpose. When purpose collapses, a man must decide whether to end or to begin. He looked at his hands. The same hands that once commanded fortunes now trembled slightly. He traced the veins like roads leading nowhere. He wondered how many trades those hands had executed out of fear rather than insight. How many times he had mistaken movement for mastery. Outside, the evening light bled into gold. The city was moving again. Thousands of souls chasing their own illusions of control. He almost envied them the comfort of not yet knowing. But envy is a luxury for the unbroken. He was past that now. The mind, when stripped of noise, begins to whisper truths it has long buried. He heard one now, clear and merciless. You were never listening to the market. You were listening to yourself inside it. He closed his eyes. For the first time, he didn't resist the thought. He let it unfold, a slow confession to no one in particular. Yes, he had been brilliant. Yes, he had read the crowd better than anyone. But he had also fallen in love with his own reflection in the ticker tape. He had mistaken awareness for control, intuition for prophecy, courage for need. Every empire collapses the moment its ruler believes he is the source of its order. The market is no different. It rewards awareness, not ownership. The instant you think you own it, it humbles you. He rose from the chair and walked toward the window. The glass reflected his face against the skyline, one image fading into another. New York still pulsed, alive, 1,000 stories rising from 1,000 ambitions. And yet, from this height, it all seemed silent, almost graceful, a living organism breathing beneath its own illusions. He whispered, barely audible, maybe the market never betrayed me. Maybe it simply revealed what I refused to see. The words hung in the air like incense. There was no bitterness in them, only clarity. That perhaps was the first sign of healing, when a man can speak the truth without bleeding. He returned to the desk. The blotter still held traces of ink. The memory of trades now irrelevant. He opened a blank page and wrote slowly, as if carving into stone. The greatest loss is not of capital, but of attention. He underlined it once. Then again, the pen paused. He let the silence fill the room. In that space, something shifted, not redemption yet, but the first hint of direction. The sun dipped below the skyline. The city lights flared to life, one window at a time, like neurons firing in a restless brain. He watched them flicker and thought, each light is a man thinking he can beat the dark. He smiled faintly, the smile of someone who finally understands the joke the universe has been telling all along. He realized that this quiet was not punishment. It was invitation. The market, that merciless teacher, had cleared the board so he could see again, and what he saw was simple. All games end. Only awareness remains. He exhaled. The air left his lungs like a confession. The ticker would click again tomorrow, indifferent to his presence. But tonight, he would let the silence teach him. Every trader needs one night like this, the night he stops pretending and simply listens. For the first time in his life, Jesse Livermore didn't plan his next move. He didn't think of recovery or revenge. He simply watched the darkness settle, and within that darkness, he felt something faint, but real peace. Not the peace of victory, the peace of truth. And from that truth, a new beginning waited. Patient as dawn, the mirror. The next morning arrived without invitation. No ticker woke him. No telegram begged for orders. Only the quiet light of dawn creeping across the wooden floor. A reminder that even after a man has fallen, the world keeps its rhythm. Jesse sat where he had left himself the night before, at that same desk, surrounded by yesterday's ghosts. Empty cups, half-burned cigars, notebooks filled with numbers that no longer mattered. He felt no urge to trade. He felt no urge to move. And yet, somewhere between the stillness and the ache, a question began to form. If the market no longer defines me, what does? He opened his notebook, the same one that once held predictions and strategies, and wrote a single line across the top. I must meet the man who traded all these years. He didn't mean the public legend, the Wall Street name printed in headlines. He meant the man underneath, the one who lived behind the hunger, behind the noise, behind the numbers. For most of his life, he had mistaken activity for existence. As long as he was moving, he believed he was alive. But motion, he now realized, was often just avoidance, dressed as purpose. The market had been his mirror, and he had loved that reflection, the image of a man who could outthink chaos. But mirrors are cruel teachers. They show everything, even the things you don't trade for. He began to remember the small betrayals of clarity. The first time he ignored a stop loss because he felt certain. The first time he saw a loss but called it temporary. The first time he felt fear and named it strategy. Each lie small enough to justify, until the collection of them became identity. Now, stripped of illusion, he faced the truth. It was never the market that deceived him. It was his need to be right. He turned to the window. The city was awakening. Steam rising from grates, carriages rumbling, men in coats moving quickly toward their own ambitions. He envied their certainty. He remembered when he too had walked with that kind of blindness. There is a mercy in ignorance. It lets you believe the game can be mastered. Wisdom, he thought, is lonelier. It arrives when you finally see that mastery was never the point. It spoke quietly, as if confessing to the empty room. The market didn't punish me. It revealed me. He said it again, slower this time. It revealed me. The words didn't sting, they freed him. He saw now that his entire career had been a dialogue with something far deeper than money. Each rise and fall was an argument between his ego and the truth. The truth had always been patient. It had waited through every success, through every moment of arrogance, until he was ready to listen. He walked to the mirror above the fireplace, an old, dust-coated glass that had reflected his triumphs and his failures alike. His reflection stared back, eyes tired but clear. He didn't look like the photographs on magazine covers. He looked human, vulnerable, honest. He studied the lines on his face, each one a record of an emotion once denied. Greed, fear, exhilaration, despair. The market had written its history across his skin. He whispered, "This is the real ticker." 1. He smiled at the absurd truth of it. The chart he had ignored all along was his own face. Every pattern, every correction, every reversal was drawn there. For a long moment, he simply watched himself breathe. That simple rhythm, inhale, exhale, felt more genuine than any prophet ever had. He thought about discipline, that sacred word repeated by every trader as if it were a prayer. He used to think discipline meant control. Now he saw it differently. Discipline was surrender, the humility to accept that the market owes you nothing. It wasn't a weapon against chaos. It was a conversation with it. He returned to the desk, flipped to a new page, and began writing not rules, but realizations. I do not trade the market. I trade my own mind within it. Ego is noise, awareness is signal. Loss is the tuition for wisdom. Patience is not waiting. It is attention without anxiety. He stopped after the last line. That one felt truer than the rest. He leaned back and closed his eyes. In the quiet of that realization, something shifted inside him. A weight he didn't know he was carrying dissolved. He remembered the young man who had started all this. Not the legend, not the speculator, but the curious boy who wanted to understand movement. That boy hadn't cared about wealth. He had cared about why things moved. When had he lost that? Somewhere between admiration and addiction. He guessed. He stood and opened the window. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, cutting through the stale scent of smoke and regret. He breathed it in deeply. It felt like honesty. Below him, the streets shimmered with morning. The world was awake again, the same as always, yet entirely new. He realized he had been given a rare gift, to start again, not from ignorance, but from understanding. He thought of all the traders who would come after him, men who would repeat his rise and his ruin, each believing their story would end differently. He wanted to tell them that the secret isn't in the system. It's in the silence between victories. But truth cannot be handed over. It must be earned in loss. He smiled gently and spoke to the empty room as if to a student unseen. You can't rebuild what you don't first dismantle. That sentence lingered. It sounded like advice, but it was really confession. He felt no urge to predict, no urge to prove. He only wanted to understand the next breath. The mirror across the room caught the sunlight. For a brief second, it flared with gold, and in that reflection, he didn't see the fallen trader or the lost fortune. He saw a man simply aware. He whispered one last time, "Perhaps this is what success was always trying to teach me, that freedom begins the moment I stop needing to win." Oh, he closed the notebook. Outside, the market was opening again, bells ringing, crowds shouting, the eternal theater of greed and hope resuming its act. But in this small room, a different kind of trade was taking place, not between buyer and seller, but between illusion and truth. And for the first time in years, Jesse Livermore felt like he was finally on the right side of the market. The lesson of the fall: there is a silence that follows every collapse, not the quiet of rest, but the vacuum left when meaning itself disintegrates. For days, Jesse Livermore wandered through that silence. He didn't trade, didn't read, didn't speak. He simply existed in the ruins of his own certainty. And in those ruins, a strange peace began to grow. A peace born not of victory, but of surrender. He realized something few men ever do, that a fall, when faced completely, is not destruction. It is revelation. He had spent decades chasing control. Now the market had taken it away. And in that absence, he began to see truth. Every chart, every system, every theory he had ever built was just an attempt to protect himself from chaos. But chaos was never the enemy. It was the teacher. The market doesn't punish. It reveals. It strips away illusion until only essence remains. He began to think of his losses not as mistakes, but as messages. Each loss was a sentence in the language of reality. He had simply never learned to read it. He opened his notebook again and wrote, "The market speaks in pain. Those who listen, learn." He paused, stared at the words. They sounded harsh, yet undeniably true. Pain had always been his first teacher. As a young man, it taught him discipline. As a legend, it tried to teach him humility. He had ignored it. Now it had returned, patient and final. He began to recall the subtle arrogance that grows in success, the quiet voice that says, "You understand." It's that voice, he now knew, that destroys even the wisest trader, because the moment you believe you understand, you stop observing, and the market belongs to the observer, not the believer. He whispered to himself, almost prayer-like, "Ignorance keeps you alert. Knowledge puts you to sleep." The irony tasted bitter. He had built an empire of knowledge and slept inside it. Now, stripped of everything, he was awake again. He walked through the apartment slowly, touching the walls as if mapping the edges of his own mind. The air smelled of dust and ink and memory. Every object had a story, a reminder of who he had been. He saw the framed newspaper that once called him the boy plunger. He remembered the pride that headline gave him, the thrill of being seen. He took it off the wall. The frame was heavy. He placed it face down on the desk. There was a strange relief in that small act, as if turning his back on a false god. He poured a glass of water, watched the surface tremble in his hand, and thought, "That's what a market looks like when you stare too hard it shakes back at you." He smiled. It was the first real smile in months. He understood now that ruin doesn't cleanse you by mercy, but by exposure. It takes away everything you hide behind, the image, the title, the applause, and leaves you naked before your own design. Most men run from that nakedness. Few endure it long enough to transform. He wanted to endure it, not to become great again, but to become real. He thought about what greatness had cost him. It had cost him silence, reflection, humility. It had cost him peace. Success, he realized, is a debt that grows with interest. Every victory demands repayment in awareness. If you refuse to pay, ruin collects. He laughed softly. So this is payment due. The laughter didn't feel bitter. It felt alive. He sat again, the afternoon sun painting long gold stripes across the desk. He wrote, "To trade well is to die many small deaths. The death of certainty, of pride, of impulse, until what remains is patient enough to see." He underlined patient enough to see. That phrase echoed in his mind. He began to recall how every major profit he had ever made came not from brilliance, but from waiting, from sitting still while others rushed, from listening longer than fear could speak. Maybe ruin was just another form of waiting, the long pause before a clearer chapter begins. He looked out the window again. The city glowed in the late light, like gold dust on steel. Men hurried below, chasing their small urgencies. He watched them without judgment. They were him, once. He remembered something he had read years ago, a line from Marcus Aurelius. "The obstacle is the way." He had admired it then. Now he understood it. The obstacle was not outside. It was himself. He whispered, "The market wasn't my adversary. It was my reflection." That realization landed with the weight of inevitability. How many times had he thought he was fighting against something, when in truth he was fighting within it? He looked down at his hands again. The tremor had steadied. He flexed them slowly, marveling at their simplicity. Two hands, the same tools he had used to build, destroy, rebuild. The market had never changed. Only the hands holding the pen had. He turned back to the notebook and wrote a final line for the day. Failure, faced honestly, is education in its purest form. He closed the book gently, as one might close a sacred text. Evening came. He didn't light the lamps. He wanted the darkness, wanted to feel its shape around him, to see how much of it he could bear. The city outside glittered, a million small victories flickering against the inevitable night. It felt no envy, no regret, just a calm awareness that everything rises and falls according to laws older than ambition. He realized the market was simply a reflection of the universe itself, a constant cycle of expansion and correction, of pride and humility, of illusion and truth. And he, like every trader before and after, was just another wave in that eternal tide. There was comfort in that thought, not resignation. Alignment. He whispered to the dark, "Perhaps wisdom is learning to lose beautifully." He let the words settle like dust in still air. He understood that the real prophet of a fall is the person you become when you stop resisting gravity. Outside, a faint breeze moved the curtains. The sound reminded him of the ocean, and he thought, yes, the market is the sea and I am learning to swim again. He sat back, closed his eyes, and let the rhythm of his own breath mimic the waves. Rise, fall, rise, fall. Each breath was a trade, an exchange between surrender and awareness. He thought, this is the real comeback, not wealth equilibrium. And with that thought, something inside him loosened, something tight that had held him captive for years. It was the need to prove, to win, to matter. He exhaled, long and steady. The noise left with it. He had fallen completely, undeniably, and found that the ground itself was not punishment, but foundation. In the stillness of that understanding, the great trader who once ruled markets became a student again, not of numbers, but of truth. And perhaps, he thought, that was what the market had wanted from him all along. The rebuild. Morning again. No headlines. No excitement. Only the faint blue light spilling through the curtains and the soft hum of a city that no longer seemed like a battlefield. For the first time in years, Jesse Livermore felt no urgency. The need to do had been burned away. All that remained was the quiet wish to see. He boiled water slowly. He listened to the sound of it warming, a whisper that, strangely, calmed him more than any ticker ever had. There was a rhythm in it, patient, inevitable, trustworthy. Perhaps the world, he thought, was full of such rhythms. He had simply been too loud to hear them. He returned to his desk, the same desk where empires had risen and fallen in his mind. Only this time, it was not a command post, it was a classroom. He opened his notebook and drew a line across the page. Nothing else. Just one long, deliberate line. He watched it straight. Simple, unhurried, and whispered, "This is what discipline looks like when it's honest." He began again not by trading, but by observing. The market, the city, the people on the street. Every motion seemed connected to a deeper order he had never respected before. He realized that trading, at its heart, was not about predicting movement. It was about listening to the rhythm of uncertainty. And uncertainty, if respected, becomes wisdom. He wrote, "Patience is participation without anxiety." He underlined it twice. Every day for the next few weeks, he repeated a simple ritual. Wake before sunrise. Sit by the window. Observe the first light touching the city's glass towers. Then open the charts not to find opportunity, but to understand silence between movements. He would watch for hours without acting. He let the charts breathe. He let himself breathe. At first, the lack of action felt unbearable, like hunger with no food. But slowly, the hunger turned into clarity. The less he did, the more he saw. He began to sense the market's pulse again, not as a noise, but as a conversation. He saw how every rush upward contained its own exhaustion, how every panic hid a quiet opportunity, how every crowd movement was simply fear changing its mask. He began to understand that wisdom was not found in winning. It was found in watching. He recalled his own past self, the man who had treated patience as a waiting room between victories. He smiled, a little sad, a little wiser. "You cannot rush understanding," he said softly. He started placing trades again, but they were different now. Smaller, calmer, almost reverent. He no longer chased fortune. He tested perception. Each trade was a meditation. Before acting, he asked himself, "Am I seeing or am I wanting?" If the answer leaned toward wanting, he waited. If it leaned toward seeing, he acted slowly, deliberately. Some days he didn't trade at all. Those days were victories too, because now he knew the hardest skill in any market, to sit still while everyone else moves. The discipline he practiced no longer came from control. It came from respect for chaos, for probability, for the invisible logic that runs through everything alive. He wrote again, "Control is an illusion. Alignment is truth." And so, he thought of the younger traders, eager, brilliant, loud, repeating the same mistakes he once made. He wanted to tell them, "You will never master the market by fighting it. You master it by becoming quiet enough to hear what it's saying." He realized that a true trader isn't a gambler of prices, but a student of human emotion. The ticker tape was only a mirror of mass psychology, a collective dream of fear and greed. To understand that dream, you had to understand yourself. He began meditating before the opening bell. No mantra, no mysticism, just silence. 10 minutes of stillness before the storm. In that stillness, he learned to recognize the voice of fear before it became action. He learned to recognize greed before it became blindness. He wrote, "The goal is not to eliminate emotion, but to translate it." Every day, he saw more clearly how the market was not something external. It was consciousness, multiplied by millions, vibrating through numbers. He remembered his earlier arrogance, thinking he could dominate this living thing. Now he knew better. You do not conquer the ocean. You learn its tides. That thought stayed with him. He even wrote it on a small card and pinned it above his desk. The ocean doesn't obey you, but it carries you if you respect its rhythm. He started journaling each day's reflections instead of trades. He noticed how clarity increased when he stopped measuring in profit. The less he sought reward, the more accurately he read the market. He began to see patterns that were invisible before, not just in price charts, but in people, in life itself. The same principles applied everywhere. Momentum, correction, balance, flow. He saw it in conversations. He saw it in seasons. He saw it in himself. He smiled often now, not because of wins, but because of understanding. When he made a profit, he wrote only one word beside it: grateful. When he took a loss, he wrote, lesson. There was no anger left, only dialogue. He remembered an old saying from his early years on Wall Street: bulls make money, bears make money, pigs get slaughtered. He had laughed at it then, repeating it like a cliché. Now he understood its depth. Greed is not just wanting more, it is forgetting balance. And the market exists to restore balance. He realized the same was true in life. Every excessive pride, every overreached emotion must correct itself eventually. Loss, therefore, was simply nature restoring proportion. He whispered, almost with reverence, the correction is the cure. From that day, he stopped resenting downturns in markets or in moods. They were not failures. They were recalibrations. He walked differently now, slower, lighter. He dressed plainly. He no longer sought recognition in the eyes of others. The applause he once craved had become noise. The real reward was internal alignment. People who saw him again said he looked younger, but it wasn't youth, it was release. He began mentoring a few young traders quietly, anonymously. He didn't teach them strategies. He taught them attention. He told them, if you can learn to listen deeply to the market, to yourself, you'll never need to chase fortune. It will come find you when you're ready. Most of them didn't understand at first. They wanted quick rules, shortcuts, patterns. He smiled. He had been them once. He said gently, the market rewards clarity, but clarity comes only after confusion. He gave them a final piece of advice that made them pause. Never trade when you feel loud inside. That sentence lingered in their minds, as it had lingered in his heart for years. And so he continued trading a little, teaching a little, living mostly in silence. Every now and then he would step outside, watch the sunset bleed across the city's steel, and feel that rare sense of equilibrium that only truth can give. He no longer saw his life as a series of victories and defeats. He saw it as an unfolding, a chart of consciousness, each loss a correction, each gain a confirmation. He whispered to the fading light, I don't trade for wealth anymore. I trade for understanding. And in that single sentence, he finally reconciled the two worlds, the one inside him and the one that moved outside. This was the real rebuild, not a return to power, but a return to presence. The eternal market. There comes a point in every life when the chase ends, not because the world has run out of prizes, but because you have finally run out of illusions. For Jesse Livermore, that moment arrived quietly, like a tide returning to shore. He still traded, he still studied the market, but something fundamental had changed. He no longer believed the market existed to make him rich. It existed to make him aware. He began to see every chart, every fluctuation, as a mirror reflecting the hidden geometry of life itself. Where others saw randomness, he saw rhythm. Where others saw chaos, he saw the pattern of correction. Every rise contained its fall. Every collapse contained its seed of rebirth. It was all one motion, breathing in and out, the same way the universe breathes through galaxies and stars. He realized that the market was not a place of numbers, but of consciousness. It was human hope, fear, greed, and humility rendered in price. To study it was to study mankind, and to study mankind was to meet God through arithmetic. He laughed at the thought, not out of irreverence, but because of its simplicity. We spend our lives chasing profits, he thought. Yet all the while, the market is trying to teach us how to see. He began to live as if every day were a lesson. If he made a profit, he thanked the lesson of patience. If he took a loss, he thanked the lesson of proportion. Both were sacred. Both were necessary. He wrote, "A trader's first duty is not to make money, but to remain teachable." He underlined the word teachable 3 times. The world outside still measured success in numbers. It always would, but he no longer belonged entirely to that world. He remembered how his earlier years had felt like a war. Every trade a battle, every profit a victory. Now, there were no enemies, no victories, only participation in something vast, ancient, and endlessly balanced. The market, he thought, was eternal, not because it existed forever, but because it perfectly imitated life. Uncertain, cyclical, cruel, generous, and, if you paid attention, fair. He smiled at that fair, a word few traders ever use sincerely, but it was true. The market is fair because it always tells the truth. It rewards awareness and punishes noise. It gives every man the same test, over and over, until he learns. He had failed that test countless times, but failure, he realized, was the curriculum. He began to write small reflections in the margins of his charts. Not numbers, but sentences. Every top is arrogance, meeting reality. Every bottom is humility reborn. What repeats is what we refuse to learn. He didn't publish these thoughts. He didn't speak of them. They were not meant for headlines. They were his quiet dialogue with the eternal market, the invisible intelligence that moves through every trade, every life. At times, he would step outside his office and watch the crowds in the street. The rhythm was the same, the rise and fall of emotion, the surges of fear and desire, the small corrections when truth returned. He realized that the market was not confined to Wall Street. It was everywhere human intention collided with reality. He whispered, almost in wonder, "Perhaps the market is just another name for the soul learning its limits." That thought stayed with him. He began to treat every moment like a trade. Observe, wait, act with awareness, and accept whatever outcome arrived. If a day went wrong, he did not resist it. He simply marked it as a correction. If a day went well, he marked it as momentum. He understood now that both were part of the same movement toward equilibrium. He thought about the younger traders he had once mentored. Many had gone on to make fortunes. Some had disappeared. A few had written to thank him. He smiled at their words, but he knew they were still inside the game of noise. One day, they too would meet the silence. And when they did, he hoped they would remember not his success, but his surrender. He walked through the city often now, unnoticed among the crowds. The same man who once dominated headlines was now a quiet observer among millions. And yet, paradoxically, he felt larger than ever, not because of ego, but because of connection. He saw himself in everyone, and everyone in him. He began to believe that the market, like life, was not meant to be conquered, but contemplated. Every loss was a meditation, every win, a reminder of impermanence. He wrote again, "In the end, the goal is not wealth, but wisdom precise enough to see reality as it is." He folded that note and placed it in his jacket pocket. He carried it with him for years. Sometimes, when he sat alone in the evenings, he would think of all the men he had known, those who rose fast and fell faster, those who built kingdoms out of speculation, those who disappeared into silence like he once had. He realized that in the grand chart of human endeavor, they were all data points, brief, luminous, and gone. And yet, in their briefness, they proved something miraculous, that even impermanence can be beautiful. He poured himself a small drink, lifted it to the dim light, and toasted softly to the rise, to the fall, to the truth between. The drink burned warmly down his throat. the way honesty burns when first spoken. He felt an immense gratitude, not for wealth or reputation, but for the privilege of having been broken open, because only after ruin did the world become clear. He wrote in his final notebook, "We spend half our lives building identities, and the other half watching them dissolve. The market simply accelerates the process." He closed the book, looked out at the skyline, the towers glowing against the dusk, each light a small ambition flickering in the dark. He didn't resent them, he blessed them. He understood now that humanity's endless striving was not foolishness. It was how the universe learned itself. Through failure, through hunger, through repetition, consciousness expands. And the market, in its endless rhythm, is the pulse of that expansion. He smiled one last time and whispered to the fading horizon, "I thought I was learning how to trade, but all along I was learning how to see." The city hummed beneath him, a living chart, pulsing with hope and fear and wonder. He felt the same hum inside his chest. There was no difference now between the market and himself. Both were alive, both uncertain, both infinite. The ticker would run again tomorrow. Men would win and lose. Fortunes would rise and collapse. But somewhere in the midst of all that noise, a few would pause long enough to listen. And in that listening, they would find what he had found. Not certainty, but clarity. Not control, but communion. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and breathed slowly. The market inside him was calm. No volatility, no noisy. Just movement pure, simple, eternal. And as the night settled over the city, Jesse Livermore, the boy plunger, the legend, the fallen, the reborn, disappeared into that stillness. Not defeated, not triumphant, simply aware. The comeback was complete. Not loud, not public, quiet, true, eternal. And so, the story of Jesse Livermore's quiet comeback reaches its end. Not with applause, but with awareness. We hope his journey has reminded you that success and failure are not opposites. They are chapters of the same education. If this story gave you something to think about, share it, reflect on it, or tell us what you learned from it. Every comment, every insight, helps us grow this small circle of reflection. Thank you, deeply, for being here, for listening not just to a story, but to yourself through it. Until next time, this is Trading Lessons from Legends, where the greatest trades are made in the mind, and the true profit is wisdom.